Okay, so just to be clear, well, let me introduce the panel first. With me now, Michael Warren, staff writer at the Weekly Standard, Steve Malzberg, a host on the conservative Newsmax TV and a Trump supporter, and Sabrina Schaefer, executive director of the Independent Women's Forum. I'll start here, Steve. Donald Trump's approval ratings are dismal. A Washington Post ABC News poll finds him the most disliked major party nominee in 32 years. Is it time he stopped talking off the cuff?
Well, I thought the most impressive speech he has given was at AIPAC when he was reading from a prompter. I thought he did it well, and I thought he made his points, and he stayed on target. But look, here's one of the appeals of Donald Trump. He is not a politician. And when he's sitting there with Chris Matthews, I'm not saying we should feel sorry for him, and I'm not saying he was badgered. He should be able to handle himself. But when you're sitting there and you're talking about abortion, he's pro-life. Most people have asked if it's against the law, should the woman who goes to have the abortion against the law be punished? He said yes. That's not the pro-life position. He found that out. He took it back. They want to punish the doctors, and rightfully so. But I think this is way overblown. And as far as sound bites, let's be real here. Republicans have run away from abortion as an issue in presidential races for years. Hillary and Sanders favor abortion on demand right up until birth. That is not where this nation is. So let's play sound bites and let's see who wins.
Yeah, so what I don't understand, though, Sabrina, is why Donald Trump, I mean, this is an explosive issue in America. It still is a very emotional issue. Why wouldn't you have your thoughts in order? Because you know you're going to be asked about the abortion issue when you run for president of the United States, especially if you're running on the Republican side of the equation.
Right. You should have your thoughts in order because it's an important issue. But look, Carol, I have spent the last 4 years as the head of a women's organization focused on educating women about liberty and limited government. And a day like yesterday undermines all of what we do to talk to women about how they should, embrace ownership and control over their health care and education and in the workplace and in the marketplace. All of that gets pushed aside when we have some kind of horrifying inflammatory comment the way Donald Trump made yesterday. So what I would like to see is it's sort of hopefully conservatives and some of the pro-life groups will be able to really push back on this because it reinforces this idea that there is a war on women, that conservatives don't like women, and that somehow society is hostile toward women when we have been working so hard to tell women that's simply not the case.
Well, Michael, Mr. Trump has a real woman problem right now. In Wisconsin, more than 70% of women simply don't like Mr. Trump. This is a quote from a GOP strategist, David Carney. It's in the Washington Post this morning. He says, normally when you're in a hole, the best advice is to stop digging. That doesn't appear to be Mr. Trump's inclination. It's like taking a wagon full of nitroglycerin across the prairie. It's great if you get to the mountains and blow them up for gold, but it's pretty unpredictable. So, Michael, I ask you that same question. Might it be time for Donald Trump to stop talking off the cuff, grant fewer interviews, stop calling into news shows, et cetera, et cetera?
Yeah, I mean, that's like asking a bird not to fly. I think he's sort of constitutionally unable to do what Donald Trump needs to do, and so I think that there's the problem. You asked, should he have had his thoughts together on the abortion question? I don't think Donald Trump has any thoughts on the abortion question, and that was very clear from the answer that he gave to Chris Matthews. It's a question, it's an issue that a lot of people have been working on for decades from the conservative side, and yes, I believe Donald Trump has completely blown that up. If he's the Republican nominee, certainly if he becomes the president of the United States, all of the gains that the pro-life movement has made over the last several decades, and starting to win, I think, even millennials on this issue is really undone, and I think that it just demonstrates how dangerous Donald Trump, even as the Republican nominee, is.
Wait, Steve, you're laughing. Why?
I mean, this is insanity. He didn't stand up there and give a policy speech and say women must be punished for having an... He was asked a question. He responded. He immediately corrected himself, and all of a sudden, this is the biggest gaffe in the history of politics, and it's going to set back the pro-life movement forever. Give me a break.
No, but he is going to set back the Republican Party and the conservative movement, which while abortion is an important issue, there are lots of other other policies that conservatives are sort of trying to advance right now. And all of this does is to sort of mute all of that. No longer are we talking about job creation or economic growth or repealing and replacing Obamacare or giving people freedom and control in education. Now we're only talking about this horrifying comment. And so it plagues the conservative movement, it plagues the Republican Party, and there's a lot more Republicans than Donald Trump out there.
Well, Steve, I will say, Donald Trump was, maybe he was like, I don't know, meandering his way through an answer, and he told Chris Matthews that, yes, maybe women should be punished for having abortions, but when Chris Matthews asked him if men should be punished, he said no. He didn't have to think twice about that, and that's what really resonated with many women out there.
Really? Carol, I'd love to know that, because that's the most bizarre thing I ever heard. A man should be punished for impregnating a woman in a legal manner?
No,
it wasn't rape?
What if he
I don't understand that at all.
participated in the abortion? What if
well,
he
that wasn't the question.
The woman to?
That wasn't the question. There's a lot of men who believe that there should be a law against a woman having an abortion where if the male who's the father doesn't want it, and women are outraged at that. I mean, I still don't understand how the man fits into this if it wasn't rape and it was legal and the woman goes and has an abortion. How's the guy involved? If he brings her there, that's a different story maybe. But again, Donald Trump misspoke. And as far as the Geneva Convention, what he says resonates. We're fighting people who chop off heads and blow up children, and we can't stick their head underwater. So when he phrases it that the Geneva Convention is doing us harm in our fight against ISIS, guess what? That resonates. That most people would agree.
Michael, I just want to make it clear to our viewers what the Geneva Convention, why certain. Okay, let me just read it. So the Geneva Convention prohibits the targeted killing of civilians, and it also prohibits torture, and it also prohibits taking the oil from Iraq because that would be an act of war or plundering. That's the Geneva Convention. That's what Mr. Trump says. I'm not even clear. Does he want to get rid of it, Michael? Is that what he said?
I don't know. I mean, Steve says that, Trump misspoke on the abortion question, or that, sometimes he stumbles in these things. That implies that Donald Trump even knows what he's talking about, or even has a core position on these issues. I think what's clear from both of these instances, very different issues, is that Donald Trump doesn't actually know what he believes. You can see him searching for an answer on that abortion question. He kind of sputters off about what happened, how the Geneva Conventions are holding us back, or that America needs to engage in torture, and he equates that with waterboarding. Well, wait a second. A lot of Republicans spent a long time in the Bush administration arguing, I think rightly, that waterboarding is different from torture, is an enhanced interrogation technique. And so, again, you see here Donald Trump sort of comes in with his bluster, his lack of actual knowledge or core principles on these issues, and blows up a lot of what Republicans and conservatives and smart people who've been thinking about these issues for a long time have been working towards.
The establishment.
The establishment, that's such nonsense, Steve. Look, Mike makes a very important point, which is that too often Trump is making statements. Sometimes you might agree with them, sometimes you don't. The bottom line is that there's no consistent policy. So on foreign policy, he wants to support Israel, but he doesn't want to pick sides. He wants us to fight ISIS, but he wants everyone else to too. He wants them to fight themselves, but he thinks that we should ban Muslims. This is so convoluted. It undermines all of the hard work that many people have been doing in this town. Everybody is not corrupt. Everybody is not sort of self-interested here. And I think that unfortunately it's going to put a lot of American lives in danger.
All right,
a lot of American lives in danger. Now you're sounding like Obama. I mean, really, give me a break.
Steve, I like you very much, but this is ridiculous.
All right, I have to leave it there. Michael Warren, Steve Malzberg, Sabrina Schaefer, thanks to all.